We have another significant NHL trade and free agent update for you here today. We're talking about the latest on guys like Jack Eichel, as well as Vladimir Tarasenko, Timo Meier, Nikita Zadorov, Ryan Strome. We have the latest in the free agent world, talking about guys like Phillip Danault, as well as goaltending help for the Maple Leafs, the Hurricanes, Jaden Schwartz, and Blake Coleman, and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have another significant update here with a lot of updates on a lot of players when it comes to trades and free agency, of course, which kicks in here in a couple of days on Wednesday. This information mostly comes from the latest blog written here by Elliot Friedman, which came out late last night. Now, there's lots of updates here. I want to start off with the fact of Jack Eichel, who we've been talking about quite a lot here, but of course, it's a narrative that's going to continue on until a trade is completed. Friedman reports that he's reached out to Eichel's agents, getting some clarification based on comments made from Kevin Adams, the GM of the Sabres, where he said that he was fine with Eichel coming into training camp, no big rush, no timeline for a trade, that kind of stuff. And the agents for Eichel responded back to Friedman for a comment, basically saying that they are under the impression that there will be a trade for Jack Eichel and it will be happening sometime soon. That's all the conversations that they've had with the Sabres around him is about a trade. He's still likely going to need some type of surgery, and that all needs to be explored and figured out, and they're not expecting this to drag on and him to go to Sabres training camp in the fall. So obviously, I understand from the Sabres perspective, they want to take their time, they want to get the right deal, but saying that he's going to end up going to training camp to me is just a little bit silly, because obviously I'm sure that Eichel and his agents want anything but for that to happen, and they're going to continue to push here for a trade. Of course, in our last video talking about trade rumors yesterday, we talked a lot about Eichel himself, and all the teams are basically going in and out. They keep checking in, but the price is still really high, and it's still really difficult for them to get a deal done. It sounds like the Sabres really do want mostly picks and prospects, and teams are going to need a little bit better than that to be able to absorb this $10 million contract that Eichel comes with. They're going to have to probably bend a little bit on at least one decent roster player going back to Buffalo. I've also seen reports as well that ownership in Buffalo might prefer to send him to a Western Conference team. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. At this point, I think they need to get the best deal. Generally speaking, you do want to make significant trades with teams that you're not going to see and have an impact on very much, like the other conference is pretty typical. Sometimes teams have to pay a little bit more of a premium to trade within their conference or division. And you know what? Either way here, this is a situation where the Sabres are going to lose leverage over time, and I think they just need to adjust their price a little bit. It doesn't have to be a whole lot here, but I can understand why they want what they want. He's a top, center iceman, a real impact player, and they don't want to be undersold here, and I do not blame them one little bit. But obviously, teams are waiting them out, trying to see if the price is going to change. That's why we keep hearing all the rumors about teams being in and out, etc. And you never know what can happen. There's so many teams that have been kicking tires on this player and touching base with the Sabres that you never know that one might just come along and offer them the moon, and they might end up taking it. We might all be surprised. But either way, according to Friedman and Eichel's agents, everything indicates here that he will be traded in the near future, and that they're not looking forward to him remaining with the Sabres long term and possibly having to show up at training camp at all. So hopefully that's not a situation that ends up happening here. Talk about free agency and trade rumors today. One thing that's going to be affecting the free agent pool will be some RFAs if they're not qualified. Actually, today is the deadline for RFAs to receive their qualifying offers from NHL clubs. We've already seen a few teams, as I'm recording this video, already make sure that everything was released on what players are going to be qualified or not qualified. So we're just bound to be a lot of that news here sometime later throughout the day. And there's bound to be a decent amount of RFAs that are kind of squeezed by the cap and could become UFAs, which will certainly, like I said, impact the amount of talent that's available via free agency. Now, keep in mind, for players not qualified, it doesn't automatically mean that that team will not do everything they can to retain the player's services. It just means that they're not going to want to pay them what's required based on the qualifying offer that's due on their existing contract. If a player's due a $5 million qualifying offer and they don't feel like they can pay that, you know what, maybe they don't qualify them, but then they start negotiating and they're willing to bring them back at like 3 or 4 or something to that effect. So if one of your favorite players is not qualified, do not stress. It does not automatically mean that they're gone from the organization, but it does pose some risk because they can become an unrestricted free agent and other teams can get involved with negotiations. So we'll have to see, but there's bound to be at least a few surprises in that regard. We know as I record this that there's a couple in Edmonton, which would include Jujhar Khaira and Dominic Cahoon. Like I said, and there's bound to be more here as we find out all this information here in the short near term. When it comes to other free agent talk, another player that's going to be getting a fair bit of interest is Habs center iceman Phillip Danault. Friedman mentions here in the latest 31 Thoughts podcast and mentions it again in his blog that he's been told to not be surprised if the LA Kings try to make a splash here and bring Danault to LA. I mean, obviously they have a lot of young prospects, which are, players that are going to be able to be impact players in the coming years, but they have already had a lot of pressure from existing star players like Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar that they want more help now, and they feel like they can still compete and still try to contend here for a cup in the next few years while they're still, towards the tail end of their prime of their career. So the Kings have certainly been making additions here, which certainly goes along with that narrative, trying to get better. And obviously adding a guy like Danault would be a huge addition. Now, of course, having Danault and Kopitar, two Selke level quality center icemen for their other young centers like Byfield and Turcotte and others to learn from would be pretty significant. So obviously it's going to depend on money. Money always talks and determines where players go. I'm not sure that I would say the Kings are like a slam dunk to get Danault, but I can see why they'd be interested, and I can see it's a possibility, but I can see there being plenty of teams interested in Danault's services. Now, another free agent that seems to have a pretty good idea where he might be heading is Jaden Schwartz. It seems pretty likely that the current St. Louis Blues player is pretty likely to be signing with the new expansion team, the Seattle Kraken. There was apparently some progress made when they were in their exclusive window to speak to free agents. Obviously, he did not sign a contract. Obviously, he would have been the selection from the Blues, and maybe that's why they went down that road as well. Obviously, the Kraken also claimed young defenseman Vince Dunn from St. Louis, so perhaps they were in a situation where they kind of worked out a deal but didn't want to go through with it, at least not just yet, so they could claim Dunn and then try to sign Schwartz when free agency opens. But there is word that good conversations were had, and at this point it looks like that's where he might be heading. So the St. Louis Blues could look very, very different next year. Of course, we've seen them acquire Pavel Buchnevich for Sammy Blais, so there's one immediate change. They're obviously working on a Tarasenko trade, which we're going to talk about a little bit here further, and of course this guy Jaden Schwartz could be gone too, so it could be a very different looking forward group when we get into next season for St. Louis. Now, Friedman also goes on to make a prediction on Blake Coleman. He doesn't link him to any particular teams, but he thinks he's going to get a contract of around 6 years and $5 million. And to be completely honest, I wouldn't be completely surprised at all at this point, given what we saw Barclay Goodrow get, who was on his line along with Yanni Gourde in Tampa and played such an important integral role in them winning the last two Stanley Cups. But ever since Blake Coleman went to Tampa, he got a bigger stage, you could say, to really show his talents and show how important he was to helping them win the Cup. Between the penalty killing and the tenacious way they played, it really became a major part. Like, you look at the last few playoff series, like that line was equally as important as some of their top offensive players. So it wouldn't be surprising for a team to overpay these guys to bring them in for that kind of play that they can get from them. But that's a lot of money for Coleman. I really love Blake Coleman as a hockey player. I think up until recently, he was very underrated. To a degree, you can maybe say he still is a little bit, but that's a lot of money. But like I said, when you see players winning Stanley Cups like that, that is quite often what you do see. So who's going to end up paying him that kind of money? It's really difficult to say where he ends up. I wouldn't completely rule out Seattle in that case either, given they're one of the teams with the amount of cap space that they have that they can play with here. Maybe return to New Jersey? Hard to say, but Coleman's going to get himself paid quite handsomely. Now, the Carolina Hurricanes, of course, have a lot of UFA goaltenders. After trading Alex Nedeljkovic to Detroit, they now have Jonathan Bernier, Peter Mrazek, and James Reimer all on expiring contracts, according to comments from Don Waddell, and this was referenced in Friedman's blog as well, that they're bound to probably sign one of those guys. Hard to say which one, but he felt confident that they were going to have negotiations with all of them throughout here the next few days, and by the time we get to free agency, they're hoping to have one under contract. But I think it's safe to say, based on what we've heard from comments from Peter Mrazek's agents, that it's not going to be him. I wouldn't completely rule out a return to Carolina for Mrazek, but it doesn't look good at this point, and it sounds like he fully intends to hit the open market on Wednesday. So to me, I think it's more likely that they might sign Bernier or Reimer and to have them as the 1A, 1B scenario and bring in another goalie to be the tandem to work with them, which could be a variety of other goalies that are out there and available on the market. There's some that think that it could be Freddie Anderson. I've heard his name linked to Carolina for quite a while, but Friedman also goes on to mention in his blog that he thinks that the Hurricanes really like Antti Ranta, who is a pending UFA with the Coyotes. So it's hard to say what the price tag will be on either of those guys, but I could see the scenario where they bring in one of those veteran guys along with one of the guys they have now. I'm not really convinced that they're going to be stronger in the goaltending department than they were last year if that's what they end up doing. But they need to do something, get something figured out, because they don't have any goalies under contract as of right now. But we'll find out what they do here in the near future. Now, another team that's going to be really high on getting goaltending help is the Maple Leafs, especially if Freddie Anderson does leave Toronto, as many expect here. Of course, he's likely to price himself out of the Leafs organization. The only way I can see him returning there is if he says he'll take a one-year deal on a much cheaper value than he was getting paid before. He's just finishing up a 5-year times $5 million contract. And obviously, he feels, based on what we've heard, that he can get the same or more money on the open market. So if that's the case, the Leafs absolutely can't afford him. So they're going to have to be shopping around here. And Kyle Dubas's recent interviews, he's made it pretty clear that goaltending and getting somebody to work with Jack Campbell seems to be their top priority. Get that sorted out, then they'll see what they have for remaining cap space and can start filling out the rest of the forward group. The decor is, for the most part, largely signed and under contract, so they don't have to do anything too crazy there, except determine if Zach Bogosian's coming back or if he's going to need to be replaced. It sounds like there's a pretty good chance he will hit the open market, and it's also sounding like there's a good chance he may very well want to go back and play in the U.S., mainly because of the border restrictions and everything that you've had to deal with going back and forth between Canada and the U.S. right now. For family reasons, playing in the States might work better for him, and that might be the reason why we see him leave the Leafs. But at the same time, things are opening up quite rapidly here in Canada, and by the time we get to the start of the NHL season, all of that might be resolved anyway, so I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but that was something that was going around here just in the last couple of weeks. But as far as who the Leafs could target for a goaltender, it's really difficult to say, but they have been previously linked to a guy like Darcy Kuemper in Arizona. Of course, he's got 1 year left on his contract. If they can get them to retain even a little bit of money, that could help go a long way in that regard as well. And of course, there will be some other bigger names out there on the open market, including a guy like Philip Grubauer, but he's likely out of their price range, and there's bound to be lots of other vets too. So interesting to see which way they go, but obviously it's top priority for Dubas on Wednesday. Now, before we go any further in this video, I do need to pause for a moment and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers where you can get 20% off and free shipping on all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken the level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. Thanks very much for watching that promotional video. I do greatly appreciate it. Another younger player to keep your eye on as well is San Jose Sharks forward Timo Meier. Now, there's been numerous reports, including Dave Pagnotta of the fourth period, indicating that the Sharks are taking calls on Meier, and it is a possibility we could see him being traded. Now, it might not make sense for them to trade their younger player that still has more value, but you know what? When they're older players, though, that have those anchor contracts that are making things hard for you to do things, nobody's going to want to take them on, right? So you can't really easily move Carlson or Vlasic or Burns or Couture or Evander Kane. Those are not easy players to move on from, but a guy like Meier, who's 24, he'll be 25 in the fall. He's got 2 years left on his contract at $6 million. He's a former 30-goal scorer. He's hit 20 goals a few times. He's an interesting player, and I think there'll be lots of interest in him. And like I said, Dave Pagnotta is reporting that they are getting some interest, and they are at least fielding calls. No guarantee that he moves. But a player like Timo Meier, to me, would be a great interest for teams that are rebuilding, like Detroit, New Jersey, Ottawa. Those all come to mind as being great landing spots for a guy like Meier that's not too big of a cap hit at his age, given the fact that he's still going to be a restricted free agent when the contract ends. And I think that would be a terrific get for any of those clubs. Plus, teams like especially Ottawa and Detroit, and to a degree New Jersey as well, they have enough currency when it comes to picks and prospects, if that's what San Jose wants in return, to make a deal here that's worth their while. Because the Sharks are certainly a little bit lower on futures when it comes to that stuff, so it might be a good way for them to kind of help stock the cupboard a little bit more for the future. They do have some interesting prospects, but at this point, they need to start planning ahead, and unfortunately, some of their more valuable assets are some of their younger players, so we might see them go down that road. Sounds like the Chicago Blackhawks are trying to trade Nikita Zadorov. That also comes from Friedman's latest blog. Of course, after pulling off the big Seth Jones trade and then mega contract that came with it, the guys like Zadorov and Calvin DeHaan are suddenly expendable. I know Zadorov's due a pretty significant qualifying offer. As I mentioned earlier in the video, those are guys that could find themselves possibly not qualified. That is a possibility, and he could end up becoming a UFA. So we'll have to see about that. Chicago would obviously prefer to trade him, but if teams don't want to end up paying him what he's due on that qualifying offer, that could become a very big problem for Chicago, and they could end up letting him walk for nothing, which I don't think is something they would prefer to do, but we'll have to see. When it comes to Calvin DeHaan, another veteran defenseman with not a lot of term left on his contract, could be a nice pickup for teams looking to add some extra added depth. I mean, I think at this point in his career, Calvin DeHaan's probably a third pair guy, but given the right team and the right role, it could make sense for a pickup. I mean, they may not move both of them, but Zadorov, I think, is more of the concern given the qualifying offer that he's due. So we'll have to see. But another player in Chicago that we have to watch out for, of course, Ryan Strome's generating trade interest with the Rangers organization as well. Now, I think a lot of that is probably going to depend on the Eichel situation. I mean, we know the Rangers are one of the teams that have been in trying to figure out this deal, and if they can't, they might decide to hang on to Strome. But the three teams that Friedman links him to include the Vegas Golden Knights, the Seattle Kraken, and the Ottawa Senators. I mean, they're all teams that need center help right now, and it makes sense. He doesn't have a lot of term on his contract, so it's a situation where maybe he only goes for a short term, maybe he gets extended. It's hard to say. I think obviously the contract could determine what the return is as well. He's been a fairly productive player with the Rangers, getting a chance to play with some really good players as well. So it's hard to say what the expectations could be if he does get traded, because he may not get the same kind of role. Now, I think he possibly could in Vegas. They're in a situation where he could even play top 6 minutes for sure. But when it comes to the Kraken and the Senators, he likely could also play a top 6 role. But depending on where they put him, he may not get to play with as strong of players, which could impact his totals, which could impact his next contract. But it does sound like the Rangers are certainly interested in moving him as well. When it comes to Vladimir Tarasenko, the latest from Friedman on him, he thinks that the best landing spot right now, the most likely one, will be the New York Islanders. But again, that's certainly hard to kind of pinpoint. But as we see some of the other teams here that were rumored to be interested in him before kind of make other moves and fall out of the picture, then it kind of gets things narrowed down. But Friedman also mentions New Jersey as well. But I'm not convinced that he would waive to go to the Devils. So I think the Islanders would be more likely in that scenario. I don't know if he really wants to go to a rebuilding team. So I found that very interesting from Friedman in his latest blog here, but obviously he must have some intel to suggest that it could be a possibility. So that is all your latest updates for today. Certainly let me know your thoughts and everything down below in the comments so we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. Be up to date with all the latest news and rumors in all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.